So thank you for having me. This is kind of like a little bit of a homecoming for me. My dad is from here. In fact, there's my family right there. I come from the Adkins clan. So I did actually live here for a while. I went to kindergarten right here in this school. So that's kind of a fun little homecoming for me. I never thought I'd be back at my kindergarten school giving a talk. So this is kind of fun. My mom's side of the family, a little bit different story than my Pollock coal mining ancestors. Her side of the family came from Massachusetts and settled in Wyoming, and we're going to talk about that here in the program. So my history in Wyoming goes way, way back. I've been all over the state doing programs, and the one that I'm going to give to you today is about our shipbuilding heritage. How many of you knew that Wyoming has a shipbuilding heritage?
Not until we have a submarine and a destroyer or something.
Named after us.
Named, yeah.
But we didn't build them.
Right.
So yeah, we do have, and actually we have a lot more Navy ships named after us. Fort Casper Museum, which I'm associated with down in Casper, we have a traveling exhibit on the Wyoming Navy and all the ships that have been named after people, places, and things in Wyoming. But Wyoming didn't build a lot of ships, and this is something that, unless you knew it, you wouldn't guess that we have a shipbuilding heritage. And so that's what we're going to talk about today and kind of how all of this relates. I just gave this program this morning to the 3rd through 8th grade classes in Upton. Had a great time with those kids. Had to take a lot of the technical stuff out, so now I'm going to add all that back in. So if it sounds like I'm rambling and if I don't say something and you don't understand what I'm talking about, please raise your hand. I'd rather you know what I'm talking about than try to guess as I go along. Make sense? Okay. So to start with on our story, we're going to go to the East Coast. How many of us have ever been to Boston? Have you gone up the coast to Maine? If you've never gone up the coast to Maine, you really should. The rock-bound coast of Maine is an absolutely incredible place to visit. It's a totally different world. Very much in a class system still, where you have people up here and you have shipbuilders down here. Very different from the way we live here in Wyoming. So for our talk today, we are going to travel up the coast. Let me get my pointer here. So right here is Massachusetts. We are going to travel up the coast, past Portland, Maine, and we're going to go up to the Kennebec River to a city called Bath. Bath was known as the shipbuilding city. They were very well known for building ship-going vessels. And yet if you visit Bath, guess what you aren't on?
Ship, the water.
You're not on the ocean. You are very far inland from the ocean. The Kennebec River is a tidal river. It's a very wide river. It's a very deep river. It's affected by the tides. So if you go there in the morning and the river is up to the bank, you go back a few hours later and it's 30 feet away from you. And when that tide comes in, those currents push up river, and so the whole current of the river changes as the tides come in and out. It's still a place where they're building ships today. The Bath Iron Works is very, very famous for building Navy destroyers. And so they're still building large ocean-going vessels in the city of Bath today. Our story on the ships is going to go back to these two men right here. On the left is Captain Samuel Percy. He was born in 1856. He first went to sea in 1875. He starts as a cabin boy. He starts working his way up through the ship trade. So here in Wyoming, young men, they are grown up out here on the prairie, and what do? They go to ranches, they go to oil fields, they go to mines. In Bath and New England, you went to sea. That was where you went. And so he followed in his family's footsteps. He goes to sea, and it's really in his blood to do that. He becomes a very well-known ship's captain. He's very good at what he does, and he actually gets his captaincy very early on in his life compared to some others. On the right is Frank Small. Frank Small was born in 1865, and he, instead of going into the actual operation of ships, he goes into the business side. And he is well known for his business acumen. He is attentive to detail. He can find money, he can put money to work. He knows the shipping industry inside and out as far as the paperwork goes. The two of them get together and they start talking. We want to build a shipyard. And so let's take Captain Percy's practical hands-on shipping experience. let's take Frank Small's business experience, let's put those together, and we want to build what's going to be one of the finest shipbuilding yards in the shipbuilding city. And so in 1893, they team up together and they start the Percy and Small Shipyard. Now, when we think of shipyards, we think of very massive things, right? They're building ginormous ships. So the shipyard must be huge. They're actually not that big. And if you look at an old map in Bath, Maine, they're actually very narrow because the entire bank of the Kennebec River was shipyard, 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 one after the other after the other. So their waterfront property, which is down here at the bottom along the Kennebec River, is very narrow. So instead they have to build inland. And so the shipyard goes way up on the hill above the river. And part of what they're going to do is set up wear yards for all of the lumber that this is going to take. And they're going to use gravity to kind of help take the materials down and build the ship. It's a little bit of a practical sense there too. Percy and Small is one of the bigger ones. They have 2 shipbuilding ways. They can build 2 ships at the same time, launch the ship into the river, turn it sideways, and put it at the fitting out pier to do all of the rigging and the sails and everything that they need to do so that it can go out on the ocean. But because these shipyards are so close together, so Percy and Small is here, here's the Hyde shipyard, and here's the Donnell shipyard. The Donnell shipyard, the owner's house, is at the end of one of the shipbuilding ways for Percy and Small. So the jib of the schooner that they're building is pointing into their competitor's dining room window. He can watch their progress as they're building the ships right next to him. As they do this, they do expand throughout the years. This is the plan from 1901 to 1917, which is the time period we're going to talk about today. The shipyard did expand before it closed down, but for all intents and purposes, this is the layout that the shipyard had for its entire career building these large great schooners. This is a photo of the shipbuilding yard. Does it look like they're building ships here? No, this does not look like a shipyard, but I guarantee you that it is. That house, that was the competitor's house, is this one right here. And so their second shipbuilding way is just behind it. That big white building with the doors up is the lumber building. That's where they're going to cut all of the bits and pieces to put the ship together. And then they had various other structures like blacksmith shops and tar shops and tree nail shops and things like that. Everything on the uphill side is unfinished material, and that gets pushed down through the mill, processed into the parts, down to the ways to get put onto the ship. And we're going to go through that whole process of how they build them here in just a few minutes. One of the fun things along this stretch was that they had a trolley that ran from downtown Bath all the way down along Front Street, dropping shipyard workers off at the different shipyards. And you'll see behind the trolley is one of the great schooners being built. One of the things that the shipyard workers did, and this is why I get along with shipyard workers, they're a lot like ranchers. Their sense of humor just tickles me just right. You have those open doors, and the reason those doors are open is one of the saws that they used would travel. And that whole saw would come out of the building and back in. And when it came out of the building, it went over the trolley tracks. Oh. So ding, ding, ding comes the trolley. And the shipyard workers swing that saw out, give the trolley driver a little bit of a panic attack. He slams on the brakes, passengers go flying, and right before he hits the saw, they suck it back into the building. And you'd think the trolley drivers would learn that that's going to happen, but they did this a lot. There's one more fun story with the trolley. Captain Percy had a dog, and the dog was a very smart dog, smarter than the dogs I've got. He knew he'd get up in the morning, get on the trolley, ride to downtown Bath, go to all the restaurants, get all the scraps he could eat, get back on the trolley, and end up back at the shipyard. That is one smart dog.
Yeah.
And the dog was very famous in town for riding the trolley back and forth. Today, the Percy and Small Shipyard is very important because it's the only wooden shipyard that's been preserved in the United States. And so a lot of these original buildings are still here. And so these are all museum space now, but you can see how they have it still laid out. That mill building is just fantastic. There's belt-driven machinery everywhere. And one of the things that they would do is they're working on lumber. And so what do lumber workers have on their boots?
Spikes.
Spikes to keep from falling in. They would walk along the floor, and I don't have a good picture of it, but you can walk along the floor of it and it still has those holes from the spikes. It's very, very, very much like stepping into their shoes when you're going through these buildings. Down on the bottom is one of the drafting things, and they actually have plans for the Wyoming on that table. There are no computers. There are no calculators. Go back to your younger years. Before we had all this technology, everything is done by hand. And when they want to make parts, they have to make patterns. And to do that, they take their blueprints, and they had a drafting floor. And they would mark out on the floor a 1-to-1 scale pattern that they would make the big pattern, the 3D pattern from, which they then send to the mill to create the part to go onto the ship. So it's quite a process for this whole thing to go through. To do that, they needed a workforce of builders. And this was something that was very much a family craft, just like railroading, just like ranching, just like mining in a lot of cases. Your dad did it, your granddad did it, you are a shipbuilder, that is your family's thing, and you are very proud of the work you do to build these ships. And so a lot of the men that you see in that photo are generations of the same family that are all working at the shipyard building these great ships. To the left is their horse teams. They didn't have a lot of powered machinery out in the shipyard. All of their cranes and everything, powered by horse. So when they're lifting the big boards, when they're lifting the beams, when they're lifting the masts, it's all by horsepower and not by actual machinery.
What about the saw?
The saw was all powered by steam, but the cranes and stuff weren't, which is kind of interesting to think about. We're talking 1909. Steam power is a thing, and yet they're still using horses to put the actual ship together. So now we have a shipyard. We've got a captain that knows how ships should be built. We have a businessman that knows how to run this business. We have a shipyard. We have stuff. What do we need next? What do we need for every project?
Money.
Money. We need a lot of money. These ships are not cheap to build. And so one of the things that they have to do is find investors. And they were finding in the early 1900s it was very hard to get investors back east. They were tapping out all of those resources. And so they turned to a man that Frank Small knew named John Brooks. John Brooks says, you know what? I'm a businessman. I don't really have the capital right now, but you know who might? My brother out in Wyoming, who is the governor of Wyoming, might just have some money and he might be interested. And so Captain Percy himself gets on a train. He travels from Bath, Maine to Cheyenne. He gets off, he goes to the governor's mansion and meets with Governor Bryant B. Brooks. B.B. Brooks was born in Bernardston, Massachusetts. He went to school in Chicago. His father owned a lock company there that was a very prosperous lock company. But B.B. Brooks decided he didn't like the city. And so he jumped on a train. He ends up in southern Wyoming. He starts making his way north. He wants to be a cowboy. He ends up on the Big Muddy Creek outside of Casper, and he runs into a man named Pat. And Pat is Pat the Trapper. That's all we know him as. And he spends the night in Pat the Trapper's cabin. And Pat the Trapper says, I don't want this anymore. Do you want it? I'll trade you for it. And B.B. Brooks says, well, I don't have any money and I don't have much with me. And Pat says, well, what do you got? I got 6 beaver traps and a sack of flour. Sold. And so he gets a cabin on the Big Muddy in central Wyoming. He then rides back home to his father and his brother and says, hey, will you invest in this new cattle company I want to start? He forms the V-Bar-V Cattle Company. It becomes one of the largest ranches in central Wyoming. It's well over 120,000 acres by the time it's all said and done. He becomes a lumberman, an oilman. He's part of the Stock Growers Association. He forms the Wyoming Oilmen's Association. He becomes involved in politics. And in 1905, he is brought in to fill the remaining term of Governor Chatterton, I want to say, who had passed away. So he fills an unexpired term, and then he gets elected a second time. So now he's the governor of the state of Wyoming. His family is the first ones that live in the old governor's mansion down in Cheyenne, and he's really made a name for himself. But now his brother comes calling. I invested in your stuff, so guess what? Turnabout's fair play. Would you invest in my friend's business here? So Captain Percy spends the night at the governor's mansion, and then they head up to Casper, and they go to the ranch for a couple days. Captain Percy is introduced to ranch life in Wyoming. They talk business, they talk about what this ship could do, and Captain Percy leaves a couple days later with 3 things. Number 1, he leaves with money to build a ship. Number 2, he leaves with a name for the ship. And number 3, he leaves with a puppy. That And Captain Percy leaves a couple days later with 3 things. Number 1, he leaves with money to build a ship. Number 2, he leaves with a name for the ship. And number 3, he leaves with a puppy. That dog that had ridden the trolley had just died. So Captain Percy's kind of upset. He lost his dog. And he mentions this to the governor. And the governor says, here, have a Wyoming ranch puppy. Take this home with you. And that dog becomes fairly famous in its own right. When he leaves with this money to build a ship, he had a name for the ship. And this is something that was unheard of. Even today in our maritime tradition, you don't name the ship until it's finished. But in this case, they wanted the investment so bad, they came up with a name. And what did they call it?
Wyoming.
Nope, you guys are too far ahead in the story. They're going to call the ship the Governor Brooks. The Governor Brooks is going to be a 5-masted schooner that's going to carry coal up and down the east coast of the United States. The schooners are incredible. Has anybody been on an honest-to-God schooner? Oh, they are incredible. You have to think pirate ships or like the Mayflower that comes over. Those are square riggers. They take a lot of men to operate them. So if you have a ship like the Mayflower, how many people on the crew do you need? Anybody know? Over 100 to operate it. A ship like this, which is much, much bigger, and we're going to see a size comparison here in just a few minutes, with 5 masts, with all that sail, how many people do you think operate this ship? 11. 11 people. But the way that it works is most of your work for your sails is all done from the deck. But if you're on a schooner, and this is what makes them fun, those sails are pushing you along, and they call them windjammers, and you have to go in a pattern like this to get somewhere. And when they turn into the wind the other way, they do something called tack. And that schooner turns, and the wind catches those sails on the other side, and those giant masts down at the bottom, or the beams on the mast, come whipping over the deck and get caught by a rope on the other side, and the whole ship jerks over and you feel like you're going to go in. It is so much fun. I absolutely loved it. But anyway, I digress. So the Governor Brooks is going to be the first ship that Wyoming builds. It cost them $130,000, $44,000 of which came from Wyoming investors, $10,000 of which came from Casper. $130,000 when they build this ship is equivalent to about $1.3 million today. That is a huge investment. But what they found was that this was a financial, hands-down success. The owners had dividends returned averaging 15% per trip with 10 trips a year. They made back their money fast, and they kept making money. When they built the ship, it's actually not built at Percy and Small. It's a Percy and Small ship, but they had too many ships underway, so they built it at the shipyard right next door. When they do that, you christen a ship, what do you need?
A bottle of champagne.
Well, you'd think so, but we'll get to that. But who do you need for the champagne? You need a sponsor. There's somebody that's selected to sponsor the ship when it gets christened. So who better to ask than one of the governor's daughters? Abby Brooks was a student at Dana Hall. She was one of the older daughters that B.B. Brooks had, and they decide that since she's already out there, they're going to ask her to be the sponsor of the ship. Governor Brooks and his wife Mary are going to travel out there as well. They're all going to go to the launching. Everything's going to be good. There's two problems. There's no champagne. Maine is a dry state. There's going to be a bouquet of flowers. That's what she's going to christen it with. There's a second problem. The governor of the state of Wyoming is coming for the christening of the ship named after him, and the ship's not done. Uh-oh. What are we going to do? We're going to pretty it up as much as we can. We're going to cover it with flags. We're going to try to make it look like something, and we're going to launch it. If this was going to be actually launched on a normal case, the mast would have been finished, the top mast would have been on, most of the rigging would have been there, it would have been ready, it would have looked like a ship, and we're going to see that when we look at some pictures here in just a bit. When they do that, this is your christening crew up here. So Abby is up here on the front. They stand on the very front of the deck, and as the ship starts sliding, she breaks the roses across the bow and says, "I christen thee, Governor Brooks. May God bless her and all who sail on her." And the ship goes down into the Kennebec River. It does a nice gentle nod to everybody up on the shore, and then it settles into the middle of the river. The captain drops the anchor, and then they all meet in the captain's cabin. That's where the spiked punch is. It's a dry state. However, sailors are a very superstitious lot. And if you don't have the spiked punch, the ship is doomed to fail. And so, forget prohibition, we'd rather have a good ship. And so they had a big party before they pull it back. There's one other thing on the ship launching that caused quite a little bit of a stir. So if you look on the mast, this one right here has a flag, and it's backwards, but it says P*S, Percy and Small Shipyard. That's the shipyard's sigil. Right behind it is what's called the burgee. The burgee is what carries the ship's name, so that says Governor Brooks. And because the governor is coming to town, they add another flag. And it's this little one right underneath it, and I don't know if you can see it. We'll try this. Let's see. It has a V, a bar, a V. We're from Wyoming. What is the V bar V?
A brand?
It's his cattle brand. Nobody in the shipping city knew what a cattle brand was. They thought it was Masonic. So they had a little bit of an issue with it until somebody explained to them exactly what it was. Launching day for the Governor Brooks was October 22nd, 1907. They get it into the water. They bring it over to the shore. Then it goes to the fitting out pier. Now it's going to look like an actual schooner. Meanwhile, the governor and his party are going to be entertained in the town. And I will tell you what, when you are a dignitary in Bath, Maine, and they know that they want to impress you, they will put on a show. You can't eat the food. It's disgusting, but I think it's disgusting, but I don't like seafood. But they will try to impress you. So one of the things that they do is they throw a very large dinner for Governor Brooks downtown in Bath, and they invite some special guests. And being a historian, I love making connections between things, and I love the 6 degrees of separation, where you can connect yourself to anybody else on the planet through at most 6 people. And so I play that game going back through history. He sits down to lunch with somebody that you might have heard of. How many of us have studied the Civil War? A little bit. How many of us have seen the movie Gettysburg? Mm-hmm. And the Battle of Little Round Top, and Joshua Chamberlain, the hero of Little Round Top, who turns the tide for the Union at the Battle of Gettysburg and turns the tide of the war? He's governor of Maine and president of Bowdoin College. Governor Brooks sits down with Governor Chamberlain and has lunch together in Bath, Maine, which is kind of a cool connection. So Governor Brooks goes on. She's serving a very nice career. Those dividends are coming in. The money's coming back in. And so what do Percy and Small do? They go back to Wyoming and say, "Do you want to do another?
Yeah.
Let's do another boat." And so they come back to Wyoming and they said, "This first ship did so well, can we get money for an even bigger project?" And they do it. And what they do is they draw up plans for what is going to be the largest wooden sailing vessel ever built. Ever. They're going to call it the Wyoming. What better name for the largest wooden sailing vessel than one of the 5 largest states in the United States? And so the Wyoming is going to be a 6-masted schooner. She's going to be 330 feet long.
Gosh.
From right here, let me get my laser pointer. From right here to right here is 330 feet. If you go from the tip of the jib to the back of the spanker, I didn't tell the kids that it was called the spanker. I just knew what would happen there. It's 444 feet long.
Holy cow.
From the bottom of the keel to the top of the topmast, she's as tall as a 17-story building. And she's built to carry 6,000 tons of coal.
Oh my God.
She's going to cost $164,000, which is about equivalent to $1.64 million in today's dollars. She's going to have a crew of 11. When they build the ship, they run into some engineering problems that are going to come into play later on in our story. But here's a view of the deck. These are the hatches for the coal bins, and in between those are going to be cabins. So there's the cabin at the back, a cabin here, and a cabin at the front where the kitchen is. The ship has quite the curve to it, and that's to try to help get it through the water. But one of the problems that they have is she's so long that she flexes. And in shipping, we call it hogging and sagging. Sagging is when the ship goes like this. Hogging is when it goes like this. And so if you take a building, let's just take one of our old cabins, and we pick it up to move it somewhere, and you see those boards flexing, what happens when it hogs and sags? The boards come apart. They separate, and if the boards come apart, you got water coming in. And so that was becoming a very big problem. To try to counteract this, they came up with a new idea, and what they do is they go into the side of the ship and they put cross bracing made out of metal to try to hold the ship together as much as they can. When they put the cabins in, they spare no expense. When a captain toured this ship right after it launched, he said the lowliest mate's cabin on the Wyoming was better than the captain's quarters on other ships that he had worked on. So not only is this a very big ship, not only is it a very technologically advanced ship, this is a very fine ship. And it is the pride of Percy and Small, and it's their crowning achievement in shipbuilding at that shipyard. To give you an idea of size, here we go. There's the Santa Maria, there's the Wyoming. They did have some wooden ships that were bigger, but they were not wooden sailing ships. This is the largest wooden sailing ship ever built. And you can see the Titanic, interestingly enough, is built at the same time as the Wyoming. We'll get into that. And then the Queen Mary II, which the children were just blown away with. Got a lot of questions about the Queen Mary II that I couldn't answer because I'm talking about a wooden ship. But anyway, so there's the Wyoming compared to everything else. She's a very massive ship. So, how do we build a ship? Where do we start? We got the money, we got the materials, we got the shipyard. What do we do first? You're going to start at the bottom. We're going to start at the keel. So we're going to lay down the keel of the ship, which is going to be laid down in April 1909 for the Wyoming, within 2 weeks of the Titanic's keel being laid. So you have the Titanic and the Wyoming both being constructed at the same time. Two different technologies. We see how that went. So they start with the keel, and then they put the stern up. Now you're going to start working from back to front. And so now you're going to take ribs that are going to form that ship shape, and we're going to start building them from back to front, holding them together with temporary cribbing and everything else. And there's one of those cranes that's horse-powered to help them do all of this. As they do that, that ship shape starts to come together. This all starts to become a thing. Now we've got workers inside. Now they're starting to put the boards on the side. And here's where another interesting fact comes in. The only steel that's used in the construction are those ribs that they put in, that cross bracing. The entire rest of the ship is held together with wooden pegs called tree nails. And one of the thoughts behind that, you go, that's kind of crazy. Why wouldn't you use nuts and bolts? Well, it actually serves a very practical purpose. When you put the wood peg in a wood hole and it gets wet, what happens to the wood?
Swells.
It swells and it creates a watertight seal. You can't do that with a bolt. And so it was actually a very practical thing, a very old way to build ships, and it worked. And so as they go through here, they're putting those wooden pegs in, and they're starting to get the ship to really hold itself together. Eventually, you get that ship shape. And there you can see, there is the walkway that the workers are going to use to get up there and work in the ship. Look OSHA approved to anybody? Not quite. Shipyards, like everything else, were very, very dangerous places to be. Lots of accidents, lots of deaths at these shipyards because of things like that. But when you are the sponsor of the ship and you're in your fine dress going to christen the ship, guess what you have to do? You got to go up that just like the ship workers do. So that caused some problems as well. But here we have the ship shape in. The sides of the boat are starting to cover those ribs. We don't have the jib on yet. We don't have the mast. That's going to come soon. And in fact, here we go. There they put the jib on the front. Now it's starting to look like a ship. And you can see that curve that's in that design from when they build the ship. And there you can see the horse team with the cranes up there. The two masts that you see at the back, right here, that's from a ship that's already been launched. That is on the fitting out pier, getting the last bit of work done on it before it goes into service. Then you're going to put the masts on. The masts have a whole nother story behind them. By the time they need to build these ships, they're looking for tall trees. And where are the tallest trees in the United States? California, Washington, Oregon.
You cannot fix Washington, D.C. from within Washington, D.C. You have to fix it from the outside. It has to be citizen uprising. And the only way you can do it is through an Article 5 convention. There are lots of other ideas that people throw out there that aren't in the Constitution necessarily. This is a peaceful, legal, constitutional method for reining in the federal government, which, like I said earlier, is the responsibility of the states. That's one of their roles, and they've abdicated that responsibility horribly. Our founders would be appalled that we're thinking of solutions other than an Article 5 convention, because that's the process they put in for this purpose.
By the time they need to build these ships, they're looking for tall trees. And where are the tallest trees in the United States? California, Washington, Oregon. That's where your masts are going to come from. The saplings of those trees that make these masts, or these masts were saplings when Christopher Columbus came over. That's how old these trees are. They take them, they ship them across the country, they put the masts in place, and they have a system where, this isn't tall enough, so they have a top mast that goes up above here. And if you look at frontier forts, so if you've ever been down to Fort Casper, you'll see the frontier forts flagpoles at Fort Laramie, Fort Casper, same design. It's a ship design. It worked. It was strong. Also leads me to tell people when they visit the fort that a ship sunk there and they used it as flagpole. Anyway.
How are they attached?
So the topmast and stuff, through a whole series of braces and straps. And they're actually put up there where you can drop them down. So they can lower that topmast to get under bridges, which is kind of interesting to see. I actually did that on a schooner. It was quite the process. So this is the Wyoming, and she is set, she is ready to go in, and you can see the difference between the Wyoming in this picture and the Governor Brooks from the Governor Brooks' launching day. Launching day was supposed to be December 14th, 1909, so they start in April, they're ready to launch in December. That's pretty fast to build a ship. It doesn't happen on the 14th. If you've ever been up in the Maine area during the winter time, they get some really nasty storms. And one of those storms blew in and delayed the launch by a day. And so launching day is actually going to be December 15th, 1909. When they do that, they of course invite the governor, but the governor can't make it this time. So instead he sends his wife, and his wife is going to represent him. And so this is Mary Brooks. Mary Brooks was very much a powerhouse in early Wyoming women's movement. She was a very big member in DAR. She had women's clubs in Cheyenne. She was friends with various women around the state that would go on to be lawyers and politicians and doctors. She was very well connected in that circle. But she's not going to be the sponsor. They got to find another person to sponsor the ship. Now they turn to Governor Brooks' youngest daughter, Lena. Lena is going to school back east just like her sister did. And Lena took after her father. She was not her mother's favorite because she was not prim and proper. She hated being back east. She hated the trees. She hated the people. She missed the wide open plains of Wyoming. So after her parents spend so much money to send her back east to go to this prestigious school, guess what she does? She drops out. She comes back to Wyoming and she goes to the University of Wyoming because she missed her wide open Wyoming plains. That was where she felt best. But there she is. This is her in 1909 in her launching finery, as how it was described. It was a green suit that she's going to wear for the launching. On the right is Captain Angus McLeod, who was a ship's captain who took his first Bath schooner command in 1881 at the young age of 25. 25 was unheard of for somebody to become a captain, and yet he did it. He was very good. He was to Percy and Small what Captain Smith was to the White Star Line. When they send the Titanic on her maiden voyage, Captain Smith is chosen because he takes all of White Star Line's newest ships. He breaks them in, he tests them, he's the one that they trust to do that. Captain McLeod is what that is for Percy and Small. So he took control of all the Percy and Small schooners on their first trips. When they do this, they are going to try to make the launching go pretty darn well. Well, there's some problems. There is no exact science to launching a great schooner. The great schooner is built on blocks over a slipway. When they get ready to launch the ship, they send a crew underneath with oil and tallow and whale fat, and they slime up the slipway so that the ship will slide down it. And then to put the ship on the slipway, they send crews underneath with axes and sledgehammers. And they go to the back of the ship and they start knocking blocks out. And they knock blocks out from back to front, and they know roughly when the ship is going to move. Or at least they think they do. Turns out the Wyoming was a lot heavier than they thought. She moved early. So these guys are underneath the ship. They're knocking out blocks. The ship starts to move. Blocks start exploding around them. Blocks are flying over their heads, underneath them. They're jumping over them. They're tumbling. And all of a sudden the sunlight comes over top of them, and not a single one of them was hurt.
Wow.
Which is pretty incredible to think about.
It is.
Thankfully, Lena and the party were all on the ship. She has the bouquet of roses. She quickly breaks it over the bow and says, "I christen thee, Wyoming. May God bless her and all who sail upon her." And the ship glides down into the Kennebec River, does its bow, drop anchor, everything's good. There's only a couple more problems. Number one, most of the spectators weren't there. And the band that was supposed to play the patriotic launching music was also not there. They were on the trolley because they thought they had another half hour. And when the ships launched, Bath had a party. That's when you had all the sales in town, and all the restaurants had special meals, because all these people are coming from out of town, and you're going to get them for every penny that they're worth while they're in town. So most of the people missed the launching. But the launching of the Wyoming was supposed to be a great handshake across the continent. And the newspapers at the time said, "We know of no more efficient way to break down the Western indifference to national shipping than to enroll a sufficient number of Westerners among the owners of the fleet." And that's exactly what this ship is doing. Now the ranchers and the oilmen and the lumbermen in Wyoming have a hand in our national shipping. Now they care more about it. That was the whole purpose of it, and that's what this ship comes to represent. And that's partly why they gave it the name Wyoming. Once it goes into the river, they drop anchor, they have the spiked punch, yay! And then they bring it to the fitting out pier. Everybody has a party, they go home, they fit out the ship, and they put it to work. This is the ship shortly after being completed. She is loaded with 6,000 tons of coal. How do I know that? She's settled down way, way deep in the water. Very good. Her top speed is 16 knots. For us land lovers, what's that in miles per hour? 18 miles an hour. So she's not fast. She's 126 feet tall from the mast, from the top of the mast to the deck. She has 12,000 cubic yards of sail pushing her through the water. She is a massive ship.
How'd they get coal on the ship?
From docks, they would have, you'd pull this up to a pier, and they'd have a chute come down, and they just dump it in. Getting it out is the problem. Getting it out, you drop a bucket into the hold, and you have guys shoveling it in there by hand. All 6,000 tons of it.
Jeez.
Yeah. The unloading was what killed them.
So why was this a good idea instead of just sending the coal to wherever its
Quantity.
destination is?
You can carry it cheaply this way. You can put 6,000 tons sitting up the coast and have 6,000 tons delivered.
But didn't they have to get it from Wyoming to the coast?
Well, they
in the
weren't
first place?
bringing the coal from Wyoming. They were getting it from Virginia.
Oh,
So her first trip goes to Newport News, Virginia, picks up a load of coal, and carries it back up to the North New England states. And that's her job. Virginia to New England or up to Canada. And she's just back and forth, carrying sheer quantity of coal. And so the Norfolk and Western had huge coal docks on the coast of Virginia, filling these ships consistently.
Did you say there was another ship built at the same time?
Yeah, they had a lot of them. Yeah, so the Governor Brooks was in service by this time, but Percy and Small had dozens of ships. And they're all working up and down the coast.
And were they all built at Bath?
All of theirs were, yep. Yep.
Would they carry anything going south?
Nope, empty.
Empty?
Yep.
That doesn't make sense to me.
Goes fast. You're
Okay,
light.
Gotcha,
You
gotcha.
unload, you go fast, and you slog your way back up the coast.
Okay.
This is all economics, I don't know. But so she leaves from Bath, Maine to go to her first trip to Newport News, Virginia. She sets sail, they wave goodbye, and she disappears. For 3 weeks, nobody knows where the Wyoming is. She got caught in a storm. She shows up again. She goes on to serve a long career. This is not the Titanic story here. Here's another view of her. Here she has the top sails down. I've talked to some maritime people. They don't know why the top sails are down in this photo. No clue. Doesn't make sense to them. Here's a couple of photos from her deck. The one on the left is while she's still on the shipbuilding ways in Bath. You can see these rings here. These are what hold the sail on the mast. And so those are what actually attaches the mast to the sail. And they grease up the mast so that those slide up and down. You cannot lift 12,000 cubic yards of sail by hand. I don't care how strong you think you are. You're not going to do it. So there actually is a steam engine on the Wyoming. But it doesn't propel the ship through the water. All it does is it's a donkey engine that lifts and lowers the sails. And so you have these windlasses and stuff where the ropes come and they run it to the steam engine and lift and lower the sails. You can see that curve and you can see that little guy walking down the deck. Any guess who that guy is? That's the cook's helper. He's walking from the captain's quarters at the very back of the ship to the kitchen clear up at the front. Because the kitchen's at the front, captain's at the back. He had to make the trip along the deck 3 times a day, taking the captain his meal. Here's a view from the jib there on the left. You do have to climb out there to tie up sails and stuff. Somebody took a camera and took an excellent view looking back at the ship. And then there's the ship's wheel at the back. So all of your steering is from that ship's wheel. And by all accounts, very, very hard to manage. The kids had no clue how you could even stop a ship. Said you put the brakes on, it's fine. You're okay. And there's the lifeboat at the very back. The ship goes through turbulent times. They hit a depression, and Governor Brooks is asked what he thinks that they should do. Most of the ships during this depression cut off all their contracts. They take a penalty, cancel their contracts, go for more lucrative contracts. Percy and Small and Governor Brooks decide we're not going to do that. We're going to honor the contracts that we have. We're going to take a loss. We're going to keep our honor, and then we're going to go back into it. And so they were very shrewd businessmen, but they also had a lot of morals behind them. And that really spoke to how these guys wanted to operate the ship. But Percy and Small didn't last forever. And so Percy and Small starts to divest themselves of their ships. And they sell them. When World War I comes along, the Wyoming is sold to the France and Canada Steamship Company. She hauls coal over to Italy and France during World War I. So a ship that's made to go up and down the coast of the United States is now on the open ocean. Amazing that it made it there and back. Then she comes back, and now she's making trips down to Brazil. And she's coming back. Then she's sold again, this time to a company in New York, but she always carries the name Wyoming. They don't rename her. This is the last image ever taken of the Wyoming. This is on February 29th, 1924, off of Hampton Roads, Virginia. There was a coal shortage up in New Brunswick, and the Canadians requested a lot of coal. And so the owners of the Wyoming take the contract, they send her to Virginia, they load her up with 6,000 tons of coal, and they're sending her up to save the Canadians from the cold weather. On the 12th of March, the Wyoming hits a storm, and the storm is bad. They're off the coast of Nantucket. They drop anchor next to a lightship. And with them comes the Cora Cressy, which is another Persian small ship who drops anchor next to the Wyoming. All night long, they're battering the storm. The ship is hogging and sagging. Water is coming into the hull. They're watching that ship go completely on its side and come back up. And go on its side and come back up. The sun comes, the Cora Cressy looks around, and the Wyoming is nowhere to be seen. The Wyoming is gone. A couple days later, wreckage marked the Wyoming starts washing up on the shore of Nantucket Island. So this is not a good thing. B.B. Brooks is coming back from a European vacation. He steps off of his ship in New York, and there's a newspaper boy on the dock. Extra, extra, read all about it. The schooner Wyoming lost with all hands. That was his welcome back to the United States. The wreck of the Wyoming, once the seas calm down, is sticking out of the water. They decide it's a navigational hazard. Coast Guard destroys the wreck. And then it's lost. Until 2003, nobody knew where the wreck of the Wyoming was until some underwater archaeologists found the wreck of the Wyoming, and we now know where she is at off of Nantucket Island. The Governor Brooks, I get a lot of questions, what happened to that one? Also didn't fare so well in a storm, although she became a ghost ship. She's down, headed to South America, a storm hits, the crew thinks that she's going to sink, they abandon ship. A few weeks later, another ship comes around, and there's the Governor Brooks, floating along just fine. So they go on, they take the ship's bell, they take some stuff, and they set her on fire. A few weeks later, another ship comes around, and there's the Governor Brooks, floating along just fine. So they go on, they take the ship's bell, they take some stuff, and they set her on fire. And she burns down to the water line. A couple weeks later, the bottom of the Governor Brooks is still bobbing along in the water and gets spotted again before it finally sinks. So both ships end in disaster, although the Governor Brooks didn't lose any hands when that happened. So how do we commemorate the Wyoming? The Maine Maritime Museum is the Percy and Small Shipyard. It's the only preserved wooden shipyard in the country. It built the largest wooden sailing vessel ever built. So one of the first things they do is they commission a professional model of the Wyoming. And when they do that, they put a cutout on the side, and you can see that iron strapping in there that's helping to hold the ship together. They also collect the paintings, they collect the drawings, they collect the stories, they start putting that together, but even that's not enough to commemorate such a great ship. So they hold a contest. They say, artists, we want to build a sculptural evocation of the Wyoming. And they get artists from around the world that all put these ideas in on how they're going to do it. And there's one artist that gets chosen, and he's actually from Bath. His name is Andreas von Hume. How's that for an artist's name? That is a very artistic name. And his idea is to build a skeletal evocation that shows the size of the ship. When they do that, they want to sponsor phase one. Well, my mother had been in contact with Ralph Linwood Snow and Captain Douglas Lee, who wrote a book called A Shipyard in Maine. And it's back here on the table. John brought it. We'll have that. You guys can peek through it. It's an excellent book, and it starts with the story of the Wyoming in it. It's an excellent book. Well, my mom had been giving them information about our family and Lena and everything else, and so they got her in touch with the museum, and they said, would you come christen phase one? And so we traveled all the way over there. They were not going to put my mother in a cherry picker up where the deck was. So instead they brought the platform from the Bath Iron Works where people like John Wayne had christened ships from. And they gave her the bouquet of flowers just like her grandmother had. And she christens the sculpture of the Wyoming. A few years later, they get the mast done. And they get the burgee made that says Wyoming. My mom can't go at the time. She's going through chemo treatments, just couldn't make it. So I go to represent the state of Wyoming when they do raise the burgee Wyoming. And there is Andreas von Huhn and his wife. Great picture, except his eyes are closed. But he's a funny guy anyway. So now the masts are up. And this is what it looks like. Down below is when we went the first time. Up top is when I went when they put the masts up. The plan was that all of this in the middle was going to be filled in with ribs. So you could see that full outline. Money got in the way. They decided they didn't want to spend the money. And so they consider this the final sculpture. It has the bow, it has the stern, and it's got the main mast. It does not have the top mast, because if they went for the top mast, they would have had to deal with the red lights and everything. So they decided to keep it down to the top mast. And the sculpture is built on the original shipbuilding way that the Wyoming was on,
Whoa.
moved up about 8 feet from the water line. So she is a little further inland than the original ship was, but she's sitting where the Wyoming was. And when you drive to the Maine Maritime Museum, you're coming down Front Street, the trees are there. One of the first things you see is that burgee that says Wyoming flying above the shipping city. And the next thing you see is that jib sticking out over the street, and you look up at it. It is a beautiful sight to see. What you can't see in the picture is the Bath Iron Works are just upriver from here. The Maine Maritime Museum does cruises on the Kennebec River. People come, they learn the story of the Wyoming, and by golly, what a story it is. If you ever make it there, which I highly recommend, tell them you are from Wyoming. They will give you the grand treatment. We were there last fall, and Leo just happened to mention, oh yeah, he's the great-great-grandson of B.B. Brooks. I didn't think we were going to get away. They wanted to show us everything, and they wanted to hear from people from Wyoming. And so it's a really cool tie between the shipping city and the Cowboy State, and one that people really don't know about. If you do go to Bath, the best way that I can sum up a trip to the shipping city and that hospitality and that connection is what B.B. Brooks said when he was leaving after the christening of the Governor Brooks. As he boarded the train to head back to Wyoming, he turned to the crowd and said, "Since arriving in Bath, I have had the best time imaginable. Every detail offered for our pleasure was new and interesting, and we will never forget the entertainment given to us by Percy and Small and the citizens of the shipping city. I hope to have the pleasure of coming to see you again." He never did, but I like to think that you guys can finish that. You can go back and visit for him, see that, learn a little bit more about it, and all of that.
That building there,
Mhm.
is that the one the mill was
I was
in?
wondering that too.
Yep, that's the river side of the mill.
Okay,
And there's the rival shipbuilder's house right
okay.
there, which is also part of the museum complex now. And you can tour it. They have it set up. They have a few other buildings like the tree nail building, the blacksmith shop, things like that. And then they have all of these little ancillary buildings where they teach you about lobstering and how to build boats. And they do camps with people and kids especially where they actually build a boat and then sell it. And they teach these kids how these wooden ships were made. It's a very fantastic museum, very hands-on museum. If you like maritime history at all, full of artifacts. It's just a great place to go visit.
You were talking about how gravity would assist them, which makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
So this is the back of that mill, and the lumber would come out, and it looks like it was just brought right to where the Wyoming is, right?
Exactly, yeah. And
Okay.
so this is the shipbuilding way the Wyoming was on. There was another shipbuilding way next to it, and the lumber would come right out, down onto the ground. Those horses would grab it, drag it over, lift it up, put it on.
Okay,
It was a very, very fine-tuned process. And having that fine-tuned process is the only way you're going to build a ship that size between April and December. They had it down to a science. And by all accounts, it was music watching them work.
thank you.
Yeah.
Beautiful
This is the
painting.
painting part of the yard. This was done in the 80s, commissioned by the Maine Maritime Museum. This is the launching of the Wyoming. This picture is fantastic.
Beautiful.
John brought his
Yeah.
print of it. Everybody in my family has one. This really sums up that proud heritage that that city has and our small part in building the great ships.
It's
So
a huge ship, isn't it?
that's what I have for you. We have a poem we're going to read here in just a minute, but does anybody have any questions real quick?
Is there a Wyoming flag?
They do have a Wyoming flag. They don't fly it every day. They fly the burgee that says Wyoming. The state of Wyoming, when they christened Phase 1, sent them an official state of Wyoming flag, and it's in their collection. When I went there the second time, they actually put it on the flagpole for me that day.
Wow.
It's kind of cool. I walked up to the museum, and there's the buffalo. And they said, we don't know if you noticed, but we flew that for you. I appreciate it.
Well, that
Cool.
painting there with the other ships around it really kind of gives you an idea of
Yeah.
how big that thing
That
was.
is.
Yeah, she was an absolutely massive vessel, and you don't quite get the size. It's easy for us to talk about size here, but Leo found this out firsthand. Until you are standing in the middle of that sculpture looking up, you have no idea just how big that is, and to think that it's made of wood, and that it floated, and that it served for so many years.
Wow.
So Con, B.B. Brooks invested in this when he was governor, but this was a personal investment, not a state investment.
Nope,
correct?
this was not a state investment. This was all personal investments from other businessmen. So a lot of them were politicians. They were all friends. But it wasn't the state of Wyoming. B.B. Brooks invested personally. Several other oilmen, some miners, some other landowners, bankers. They really pooled their resources and made out like bandits from all accounts. So if you want to learn a little more about the story, there's a great YouTube video. Just look up Wreck of the Wyoming. It's done by a friend of mine named Tom. His YouTube channel is Part-Time Explorer. He actually reached out to me and said, hey, I'm doing this video because he does videos about shipwrecks. That's what he does. He travels around and does this. And he says, I'm doing this one about the Wyoming, and I was wondering if you could tell me anything about Wyoming, you know, how I can connect the story together. And I said, oh, funny you should ask about that. My family paid for it. He goes, no way. And so in the back, or at the end of the video, he says, and I want to thank my friend Con, whose family was a part of this, which just proves my point that there's no more than 3 people in Wyoming. There you go.
Did you say your mother was a descendant of B.B. Brooks?
Yes.
Okay, I have a book I should give her.
Okay. I'll get you my contact info. Well, we've got a poem from the University of Wyoming, and he's going to read it to us to fit in with our program.
Thank you, that was an excellent
That was
presentation.
excellent, thank you.
You're welcome.
Really interesting, wasn't
Well, this is really dangerous when you follow a nice presentation like that.
Yeah.
Well, I knew this program was coming, and John Williamson had told me that there was something on the internet or that you could go and learn about it. And Con, I viewed that YouTube, and as I recall, it's about 15 minutes long.
Yeah.
And oh, it's just wonderful. It's just wonderful. If you love the presentation today, you'll love that presentation looking at that YouTube. Also, associated with that computer access, there's a poem that was written, and it's entitled "The Six-Masted Schooner, Wyoming," and it was written by a man by the name of Jim Hand. And I don't know Jim Hand's history, but there's a little bit about him. It says that he was an assistant registrar at the University of Wyoming, and he wrote the poem about the sinking of the schooner Wyoming about 10 years prior to Francois Dickman's research project. So if Lucille knows Francois Dickman, she grew up in Laramie, and she went to school with Francois. And Lucille's parents knew Francois's parents at the University of Wyoming. And so this Jim Hand, I think is, I tried to look up information about him, and I'm just going to call him an icon of Wyoming and specifically Laramie. But I wanted to read this to you, and I had shared it with Don just when I showed up here today, and he said, you can't read it before because it tells the story, it gives it away. So if you'll bear with me. In our wake was the Cora F. Cressy with a load of coal in the hold as we sailed early March out of Norfolk on the mighty Wyoming of old. We were bound for St. John in New Brunswick, the Cressy from Portland in Maine, with our good Captain Glaisell commanding as northward the canvas did strain. The heaviest, largest, and strongest of wooden ships sailing the seas was our iron-strapped schooner, Wyoming, a good sailor in any breeze. A week on the log we dropped anchor off Catham to ride out the night in a battering sea in a blizzard with the protected Cressy in sight. Just at dusk, the bad weather grew frightful, and screaming winds raised up the sea, and snow blew so thick and so heavy that nothing but white could we see. In crew quarters fit for a captain, exhausted, we clung to our beds, sharing a reverence for nature, a silence announcing the dreads. 'Twas the six-masted schooner Wyoming, no wooden craft larger would sail, and we slid past Nantucket on schedule, passing the shoals, then were caught in a gale. Icy gusts in our masts and our rigging, lurching decks and shrieks from the hull, with nothing in sight but shadows and white, so cold the skin shrank to the skull. Don't worry, said the captain, we'll make it. 15 years this old schooner's been blown across most every part of this ocean, and never a weakness was shown. But what of our five-masted cohort? If she founders, her crew is sure to drown. We must bear on her course and be steady, just in case the Cressy goes down. The Cressy's location was plotted and a rescue encounter was made. Then we signaled the Cressy to follow, and close hauling westerly made. The doom of the Cressy seemed certain. She must turn to claw offshore. Blinded by a blizzard, we waited, hearing naught but the deafening roar. Never a storm such as this one, never a sea quite so dread. We stood by to rescue the crew of the Cressy, and lost the Wyoming instead. They say that on Wednesday our name board returned to its home on the land, and that 72 feet of one mast washed ashore, deemed too short for a vessel so grand. Could it be that the largest and strongest six-masted schooner was through? In Nantucket, Chatham, and elsewhere, was there no one to mourn for the crew? Oh, they called it the mighty Wyoming, the pride of our maritime fleet, but when it went down and all hands were lost, 'twas the twilight of wood, rope, and sheet. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Con, could
Yeah.
you mention about the Cora Cressy, what happened to it? And
Yeah, so
it's
the
actually
Cora
still
Cressy
here
was
today?
a five-masted schooner, Governor Brooks. She went on to have a very successful career, and then she went through several owners, and one of them was in Boston, where they turned her into a bar, and then she went around, and she ends up back in Maine, and they decide to use her as a breakwater, and so they purposely sink her to create a breakwater for a harbor, and she starts to rot. And she is the only Persean small ship that still has a part of her left. You can still see the keel and the hull of the Cora Cressy, although it's really not much left anymore. But they were able to take a lot of the parts off of it. So the figurehead off the front is at the Maine Maritime Museum. Some of the woodwork, a lot of what we know about their construction, they took from the Cora Cressy because she's back home in Maine, although sadly rotting away. Well, thank you guys. Back at the back table, take a look. Great to be home. Thank you.